You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
To a very special WCCS show crossed over with Punk Noir here on Saturday for you. So we'll get into it.
You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show.
No, thank you very much for joining us. It's a very special episode crossed over with Punk Noir. And as you can see, we've got some very special faces with us. So I'm going to pass over to somebody who's a bit more professional than me. Hello, Steve. Welcome to you.
Not sure I agree with that sentiment. More professional than you, but hello. I'm Stephen John Golds. I'm the editor-in-chief at Punk Noir magazine, now Punk Noir Press. We just republished my old Red Dog trilogy, which is Say Goodbye When I'm Gone, Always the Dead, and I'll Pray When I'm Dying. We just re-released those, and we're hoping to expand over the coming year to publish other poets and other crime writers that are maybe writing more niche works. And I live in Japan, and I'm 40 years old. I think that's about it.
I'm not doing ages.
So if we go clockwise, over to you, Mr. Carver.
All right. Hey. I am Will Carver. I write books. I've written 12 so far, I think. January David series, Detective Pace series, a bunch of standalones. 3 weeks ago, Upstairs at the Beresford came out, which is a prequel to the Beresford. It's currently 99p on Kindle for the next day. So, if you want, grab it. I can't remember how old I am, and I live in Reading. That's it.
And I'm Sarah Moorehead. I write speculative crime thrillers. I am an RE teacher during the day, and I murder people in books at night. I am old enough to know better. I am the mother of 2 fabulous boys, and as you can tell from my gorgeous accent, I am a proud Liverpolitan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trevor Wood. I am the author of the Jimmy Mullen series, which is based in Newcastle's homeless community, began with The Man on the Street. And I have a standalone thriller out called You Can Run, which is set in a remote Northumberland village. I'm also by far the oldest person on this panel, I would think.
I'm Dominic Nolan. I wrote Vine Street and a couple of other things. I've got a new book coming out next year called White City, so look out for that. I stopped counting at 27, so I'm probably in the 40s somewhere by now. That's me.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. I don't think you're the oldest person, Trevor. I think Steve is a cool time traveller. A bit like Doctor Who, just lives forever. Just a different face.
It's a Japanese diet. It keeps you looking young. It's all the sushi.
Yeah.
And not
He's
drinking
actually 97
as well.
Yeah,
I think that might help.
Yeah, I think. I just went the other way. I thought I'm going for the old look. What the hell? Don't care.
Weathered.
Weathered, yeah.
Wise, not weathered, wise. I'm
Wise,
72. I've just had a
wise.
bit of work done, that's all.
It's good to look wise, even if you're not wise, I think.
Definitely. So, Steve, you obviously touched on Punk Noir and what you guys are hoping to do. Do you want to touch on that a little bit more in terms of, obviously you were talking about dark crime fiction, and dark crime fiction is something that we're all lovers of on this panel, and we're going to obviously talk about today. But what are you trying to do that's different with Punk Noir?
I think I want to give I want to give opportunities, or maybe I want to get behind and champion people's work who maybe isn't commercial at all. Someone maybe, you know, similar, who writes in a similar vein to myself. Someone who's not, they're really writing for the story. They're not writing really per se for publication. So a lot of it would be not fit for the mainstream. You know, I'm not talking anything too controversial, but I'm talking about stuff that's a lot more rough around the edges, maybe, would be my dream. And then I'm looking more to publish, I really would like to publish more poetry, dark poetry, noir poetry and stuff like that, which I started. I did actually put out a series at Close to the Bone, first cut, and we did some great work there, putting out a different chapbook every month of poetry, which is something that I'd really love to do again. So
if we open that up, you touched on there, nothing too taboo. A great question. What is too taboo? And we'll open it up to everybody. Is there anything out there in crime fiction that you couldn't write about because it would be considered too taboo?
Well, I've rejected stories in the past because they've had taboo topics, but I've not rejected those stories because they've got a taboo topic. I've rejected them because I felt like they were put in there for shock value, and that's not something that I'm interested in at all. I don't like that at all. I prefer, you know, I feel that you can write about anything as long as it's relative to the story, if that makes sense. That's my own point of view on it. You can write about anything as long as it's got value within the story, and unless you're doing it for shock value, in that case, I'm just not interested. And there are quite a lot of writers. I've read so many stories who have just got things that are pointless, really, but they are put in there to be, I don't know, controversial or perhaps shocking or deliberately offensive. Perhaps I'm not behind that at all. It has to be for the story.
I agree. I don't think anything's kind of off limits as long as it's not gratuitous, you know. So it's the same with kind of like comedian, you know, those comedians who kind of say things just to shock you, and I think you can talk about like difficult subjects, and you should be allowed to. For me, there are some subjects that are maybe a little too dark that I wouldn't write about. I wouldn't write about kind of pedophiles or anything to do with kids. I think I struggle with because I have kids, you know. I think so that's always difficult. But I don't think anything should be off limits if it's relevant and you talk about it in the right way, and it's not just to, you know, make a name.
Yeah, I think your editor would stop you with kids depending on what you were doing. I mean, I think it used to be different. I think if you go back and read crime fiction from the 80s particularly, there were a lot of guys that had some stuff. William Barnes used to write under the name Dan Kavanagh. He used to write crime novels.
Yeah, I've read something, yeah.
So the first one, Duffy, there's a scene near the end of that, which I'm not really going to describe. I mean, it involved a sexual act with an underage boy. And there's absolutely no way that a mainstream publisher would allow you to do that, whatever reason you might have had to do it in the story. And I think stuff like maybe like Robert Campbell's novels, the La La Land novels, there was a lot of stuff going on in that you'd probably you wouldn't be told not to talk about it, but I think you'd be told to moderate how you put it on the page. You know, I think that it can become excessive. But I mean, the 80s were the sort of decade of excess, wasn't it? Yeah. But I think changes in the industry over the years. Matthew Skoko's High Life is another one that comes to mind. You know, there were these novels in the sort of late 80s, early 90s that filled their pages with extreme material. And I think sometimes that stuff's better left off the page anyway. I think, you know, whatever the reader's going to come up with in their own mind is usually more terrifying or horrific than anything you could actually put into words. That's probably actually an advance, you know, a better thing for storytelling.
I always used to say
that's what we call the theatre of the mind, don't we? Sorry, Trevor, we call it the theatre of the mind, just to hint and let people, you know, let the reader imagine. I think that's a real skill for the author to do that and to put people in that situation. But I mean, I'm quite like Will, because obviously, I didn't really want to write about paedophilia. However, in The Treatment, which is my latest book, it's about crime and punishment, and I did without going into detail, again, it's the way you do it. There is a scene where a paedophile is punished for what they've done, but I've just done it very, very light touch, and I haven't kind of included anything that would upset me to read. But I surprised myself, because I thought I'd never go there. But when it comes to crime and punishment and feeling as though you want to punish people, well, they will be the first people I would, personally hands-on eviscerate. So it did come into the story, but there's no details. It wasn't upsetting, but there were kind of hints. So I kind of didn't think there was a taboo, but I thought there was a taboo, but obviously not.
I'm the same, really, Sarah. When I got asked this at an event, I said child abuse, and somebody said, "Well, what about in One Way Street, where Dino's being pimped out by another older homeless guy to raise money for drugs?" And I'd kind of forgotten that I dealt with it, really, because it was in context, And I didn't. There wasn't an explicit scene there, but there's a scene where Dino is lying on a mattress, thinking there's another customer coming along, and imagining how bloody awful it's going to be. And I'd completely forgotten that I'd kind of gone there, really, but it was in context, and it made sense to me, really. It was one of the reasons why we're still living on the street, because of what had happened to him in the past.
Well, actually, I have a question for you all. You're all published, extremely successfully published. Do you think it's getting more difficult in what you can say, if you know what I mean? Because at the moment, the novel that I'm working on at the moment, there's a couple of very, very, I would say, playground insults. And then I'm kind of thinking, like, one of the characters does playground insults, and I'm talking very playground stuff. But I thought, is a mainstream publisher gonna get me to cut that out?
I mean, if an editor likes you, they'll work with you to make your book the best book of yours it can be. So, I mean, my next book that's coming out is by far the most nihilistic thing I've ever written. And there was no pushback from my editor. Now, trying to find another editor, like if I put it on sub or whatever, that may have been tricky. But I think if you find somebody that likes your voice, there aren't those kind of worries. There aren't rules other than the rules that are baked into the system. And unfortunately, with London publishing, it's so conglomeration has taken it over. So you do have that sort of blob mentality in the center of publishing that's commercially based, because everything's hedged towards, quarterly growth and whatever. So obviously, in that respect, a lot of publishers aren't going to put out a whole list of books that contain extreme material. But if an editor falls in love with somebody's voice and wants to publish them, I mean, I've never been told don't do this or don't do that, or can we remove that scene because never.
Yeah, I've never been told, Steve, at all. Nobody's asked me to remove anything.
Weirdly, sorry. Go on, carry on.
Go on.
I was going to say, weirdly, I have, and I'm with like.
I don't think that's weird at all, but go on.
My publisher's very supportive of the weird stuff that I write, but I find there's you have these kind of sensitivity readers now, don't you? That read things just to make sure that there are certain things, but and I have had a couple of things come up. I just had to let go. I'll tell you this one. So I was writing the Beresford. There's a character in it who's kind of lived in this white Christian community, like almost cultish for a long time. And when she moves to the Beresford, the first person she sees is Abe Schwartz. He's a Jewish guy. And in the book she said he's very Jewish looking. And I had to take it out. Because it could be offensive, even though it wasn't me saying there's a stereotype about Jews. It was her. She'd come from a place where she'd never seen a Jewish person before, but she knew, I don't know, but it was from the character's point of view. And in the end, I had to kind of just say, all right, I'll just take it out, even though I was like, this is the character thinking surely that's okay. So I find that actually, I've never had it before, but the last couple of years I've had a couple of things come up.
To my knowledge,
See,
I've
when you-
never had a sensitivity read. I mean, it may happen behind the scenes. I've had legal reads because I use historical people in my novels, and
Yeah.
lawyers can get tetchy. But I mean, I've had characters use racial language and not had a problem. Well, certainly my editor has not had a problem with it because it was obviously based in the character. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't me making a comment, and it made sense in the context of the character, particularly maybe historically, where I've written about London sort of around the war years and mid-century. But I mean, I don't think I'd have a. What did you? I mean, I guess you don't get to discuss things with a sensitivity reader. You just get the feedback, do you?
Yeah, well, I think it was a proofreader. I didn't have it wasn't a sensitivity reading, but the proofreader thought that it could be offensive, and then it was kind of put out to other people to see if they thought it would be offensive. And I could have dug my heels in, but it wasn't worth it for that line. But I just, I wanted to say my piece, like, but yeah, it was an odd one. I thought
I can see it being removed. I know some of the people that work at Ian Fleming, and they're putting the Bond novels back out, and there have been changes made to some of them, and you know,
some of the early ones got some horrific stuff in there, Dom. I think.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, they haven't even made that many changes. I think the most of them was To Live and Let Die, because you've got the scenes in the nightclubs in Harlem, and some of Fleming's language, not dialogue, some of his language describing the patrons of the bar was, I mean, it wasn't even borderline; it was across the line. And they've sort of moderated some of it, and you know, people are losing their minds over this. Oh, it's sort of ruining the spirit of Fleming. And I'm like, in that respect, surely it would suit Fleming more to be able to widen his readership to people who aren't going to feel uncomfortable reading it.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the change of a handful of words, I don't really see what difference.
I remember we looked at Casino Royale when I did the MA at UEA, and I'm not easily shocked, but when Bond's saying something about the sweet tang of rape, and he's not talking about the plant, I was like, whoa, I don't remember James Bond talking about this normally. It was, and that really shocked me. I know it's of its time, but Jesus, I'd be surprised if that survived the cull.
Yeah. I mean,
I was going to say, when it comes to like misogyny and the way women are treated in books, it seems to be something that there's less sensitivity about, doesn't it? That seemed to have been accepted for a long time, but that something like that would be really, obviously it'd be frowned upon anyway.
It's really interesting if it's name calling that's an issue, because that just seems weird to me. And if it's a character describing somebody, that's even stranger.
It would be, I guess, but nowadays it would be considered anti-body positivity, maybe.
But if it's characters talking,
we can't keep everything. Yeah.
See, now if you read the trilogy that I put out, that's historically correct and, though politically incorrect, you know, it's for the 40s and that kind of language. But now I had a certain kind of freedom because I knew I was writing for Red Dog. I was writing for an indie press. But this is where I want to start sending out to agents and, you know, mainstream publishers. Now I'm kind of second guessing myself. Or can I put that in? Or that,
weirdly enough, even though we're writing, we're making stories up, we're also trying to represent the world as it is. And a lot of the things that we're talking about are things that happen every day. I mean, you know, I teach in secondary school. I hear all sorts of misogyny. I hear all sorts of racism. I hear all sorts of homophobia. And we're all the time, you know, checking it and, you know, trying to deal with it all the time. So we are trying to represent reality as well.
Yeah, when you go back to those dark novels, and I'm going to ask you a question that's tied into this. As soon as you were talking about novels that may be taboo, I was thinking Lolita, American Psycho, A Clockwork Orange. Those three novels just kind of popped into my head as novels that would probably be highly censored now, and probably some of them might not even get to the shelf. So what's everybody's sort of like dark, guilty pleasure of a novel that they think, if people haven't read this dark novel, you should read it because it's amazing?
I absolutely love A Clockwork Orange. That was the book that changed everything for me in reading. I think that was the one. That was the one when I was about, I don't know, 13 maybe. That I just thought, wow, I didn't realize you could write books like this. I didn't even realize there were books like this. but it's not a, it's very dark, and the lead character is a nightmare. But it's a book about what makes you human, I think, which was Scotland. So I'd be surprised if that was being censored. I think because it's not, the violence is there, but that's not the point of it, really. I think.
I mean, weirdly, in America, they removed the final chapter when it was first published there, which is sort of the redemption to some degree of Alex, and that's what the film doesn't have it, because Kubrick never read it. When Kubrick went to write the script, he'd only read.
I thought the film dwelt on the violence rather than the kind of background story of Alex, if you like. But taking the last chapter away just makes it a lot worse.
Yeah,
it's bizarre.
I think my guilty pleasure.
Lolita, I don't think has any actual material that's obscene. I mean, it's more the vibe that's created by the main character, and obviously you know what he's doing, but there's really only that one scene where she kind of rubs a leg over his thigh or whatever. There's no actual, questionable trails of physical intimacy in the book itself. I mean, I think there was a sort of a minor flutter on Twitter last year about it, that he was some kind of celebrant of paedophilia or something, which is crazy if you read the book, because he doesn't celebrate the character. The character's a knob. That's the whole point. It's completely unreliable. And Nabokov almost revels in the fact that the guy's, high-level scumbag in many ways. But I mean, he was such a writer. He'd be published today. If he hadn't been published and some editor today read Nabokov, even if he had questions about it, the prose is so crystalline, so perfect. There's no way you couldn't publish it.
Yeah.
I think I've got to go with Charles Bukowski or Henry Miller, those kind of guys. I think nowadays they're kind of, or I guess they kind of always were, but kind of Marmite. You either love them or you hate them. And a lot of the stuff, in Charles Bukowski's novels is very shocking. And he did really kind of push the envelope sometimes too much. And in some of the novels, it just got boring, some of the stuff that he was talking about. But when he was on, he was really on, and when I was, 16, 17, and I found Post Office in a secondhand bookshop, that was the first book that really kind of had a narrative that spoke to me. I'm not talking about the chauvinism in it, but I'm talking more about the working class sentiment of, doing the shitty job that you don't like and stuff like that. Because I think I was working part-time in a cardboard box factory at that time, which is as ridiculous as it sounds, just pressing a button at the end of the conveyor belt. But so probably. How about Will? I'm interested in hearing Will's.
I don't know. I've been thinking while you've been saying it. I mean, I think obviously American Psycho speaks to me. I think maybe his more recent stuff shouldn't be published, but but I think I the Bukowski thing definitely. I mean that sits well with me as well. Post Office. It was so. The way he talks about women, obviously, is quite, it's wrong now if we look at it, but at the time it was
still wrong.
Yeah, but at the time I read it, I mean, I hadn't read anything like that, and I don't know, I've forgotten what the question is. Yeah,
I think for me it would have to be Roald Dahl. I think he's completely subversive. He's very dark. He just takes revenge on people. He has, there's one of the short stories where the wife, she's being completely coercively controlled, and she finally has her husband, just his brain and one eye, in a glass bowl of fluid. And the husband can see what she's doing, and she just drinks wine. She goes out, she spends money. In a very simple way, he's very, very dark, really, really dark. And some of his older, his adult stories, or even Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and they've censored, I think they've tried to censor that, really, haven't they? Augustus Gloop is now a young boy with a very healthy appetite.
That was good. Did anybody see? I might have been the only one of us there. When they were doing Noir at the Bar during lockdown, they managed to get Lawrence Block on.
All right.
Wow.
Who I've always liked as a writer, but never considered particularly dark. The Matt Scudder stuff is slightly dark. And they always, with the celeb writers, they always put them on first because normally they draw the names out of a hat. So we were all sitting in virtual world watching this, and he came on, and it was just mind-blowingly extreme. It was like this 80-year-old writer came on, and it was the opening scene of a book, and there was rape and necrophilia. And he just burst straight into it, and you can almost hear everybody else in this virtual room going, "Oh Jesus, I've got to follow this guy," and he really went for it. I had to look it up because it was a very new book, and it's called Dead Girl Blues. And honestly, everybody just sat there staring at their screen, going, "What the hell just happened there?" It was the most extreme thing I've heard in a long time. And it was Lawrence Block, so you're going, "Well, that's all right. It's Lawrence Block. He must know what he's doing." But it was pretty brutal. I looked at the blurb and it said it begins with a murder and a rape, though not necessarily in that order. And I think that's
oh god,
tricky.
Dear.
Well, I always thought the funniest novel Cormac McCarthy wrote was Child of God, which is about a necrophiliac serial killer. And he seemed to have a lot of fun with it. He sort of lives in a cave with his victims and poses them and other things. And he's obviously as serious a writer as there could be in sort of modern times. But equally, if you read Blood Meridian, I mean, that's just a catalogue of human misery and horror. So, I mean, you know, there are ways of doing it that can be considered high literature. And equally, there are ways that aren't. But it's all in how you do it.
So if we stick on that, Dom, with how you do it, what's the darkest scene that you guys have ever written, and why did you write it?
Don't all jump at once, boys.
Oh, I thought Dom was going.
Oh, we're going with me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how dark some of my stuff is. I like leaving most of it to the imagination of the reader. I mean, there's some stuff in Vine Street. There's a bit where there's a girl's gone missing, and the main character Geets finds her in this sort of strange labyrinthine flat above an apothecary in London. But there's nothing. I specifically didn't write anything directly extreme in it. It's just left for you to work out what's happened. Probably the darkest thing. I wrote a story a few years ago called Daddy Dearest, which was in an anthology. And the climax of it, the sort of revelation of it, I think is the darkest thing I've ever written. I won't ruin it for anybody, but it's in an anthology called Afraid of the Light. So go and buy that. All the money goes to charity, and it's a good read and dark.
Nice.
Who's going? I'll go. Go on. So I think I'd have to go for my book. Nothing Important Happened Today. It's easily my darkest book. It starts with like 9 people all meeting on Chelsea Bridge, tying a noose around their neck, and then all jumping off at the same time. But that isn't the dark part of it. So it opens up with a true story about a guy in Wales who found out he had cancer and went deep into the woods and handcuffed himself to a tree and threw away the key, and that's how he killed himself. Like the most horrific. That's a horrific way. And at the end of the book, my detective character finds out who has been running this suicide cult and drives him out to the middle of Swinley Forest and handcuffs him to a tree and leaves him there, which is pretty dark. But kind of 6 or 7 chapters before that, I'd also written about Ted Bundy's execution and how people were kind of cheering on this guy dying. And I know he'd done some horrendous things, but they were making T-shirts and memorabilia, and just how awful it was that these people were kind of celebrating the death of another person. I know that he'd done what he did. But the amount of people that come up to me and tell me how much they loved that this guy got his comeuppance in that way at the end of the book. It's like, God, go back and read that Bundy chapter about that. So, I mean, it's a really dark way to die, but, you know, hopefully there's a bit more there to unpack. It's not just there to be dark. Yeah.
I think you can get away with really dark stuff if the person you're doing it to is the bad guy. You can do pretty much what the hell you like with them. Nobody really seems to care, I think. I mean, my protagonist in the Jimmy series, Jimmy beats somebody to death with a fire extinguisher. Nobody batted an eye about that. It's a pretty brutal scene. But because he was a bad guy, nobody really cares. Another homeless guy got burnt to death while he was sleeping, and nobody blinked an eye because he was a bad guy as well. It's about who the violence is done to, I think, that horrifies people. It's not the action itself, I think.
And the treatments, because it's kind of very well, there are elements of Clockwork Orange in it, and one of the stages of punishment is aversion therapy, and that was quite a difficult scene to write, because what I've done is I've taken the guy. One of the guys has done a petrol bomb attack on his ex-girlfriend, and they use drugs and sort of hypnotherapy to make them think that whatever they did to other people is getting done to them. So we see this guy in a chair having these drugs, watching this screen, believing that he's kind of being burned alive. I think that was pretty dark, but it's like you're saying, because he was a bad guy, there was an element of, yes, he's getting, a taste of his own medicine. But as Will's saying, it's also a human being, isn't it? And so it was kind of difficult to write. And a lot of people, when they read that scene, they go, bloody hell, that really stuck on my mind. So maybe that's quite dark.
I don't know. I think the hardest ones, I don't know if they're the darkest, but the hardest ones are when there's something personal in there that you're writing it to kind of, exercise, if you like. I think I wrote a scene in one of the books where a guy comes home, he's having a great day, he's got a lovely wife, everything's going swimmingly, and his wife's had a miscarriage when he gets home, and she's lying on the bed and there's blood everywhere. That nearly killed me writing that. I mean, I've been, Pam had at least 3 miscarriages before we had our daughter, and it's horrible. And writing about that seemed really dark to me. Other people might read that and kind of pass by it relatively quickly, but I think when you put something personal in there, that it just feels really dark, right?
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, like, I know it sounds like a strange question, but why do you think you tackled that head on? Obviously, being a bit of a trauma in your own life, and obviously you've decided to write about it. Is there a cathartic element there? And has anybody else as well, if we open it up to everyone, ever written about something that is traumatic to them as a way of overcoming that? Or is there something that you've not tackled yet that you want to go and tackle at some point?
Well, there's nothing personal in my life, and I don't tend to write anything personal really. But I mean, for me, it's more a sense of injustice in the world, because that really, really winds me up. I get really wound up with selfishness, injustice, people suffering, poverty. So yeah, I would feel as though those things were constantly coming into my writing, even if I didn't want them to be. And I've said to Trevor before, oh, I'm not very political, Trevor. And he goes, have you read your book? You are, And I said, well, I suppose I actually am really, but it's about, human beings and how they treat each other that really kind of upsets me, and that makes me want to write about that.
With Always a Dead, I put in probably a very, very dark scene, which was based on something that I'd heard in junior high school or secondary school, the first and second years, and it was something awful happened to someone within the school. I won't go into details, but I heard what happened. It was kind of a rumor in school, and it haunted me for a long time. Just I had heard this very disturbing story at such a young age of something awful happening to someone that didn't deserve it, and it really stuck with me. So when I was researching about the war in Okinawa, I actually, this kind of awful thing that I had heard about when I was very young, it was chronicled as a regular occurrence during the Okinawa conflict or the war. And I wanted to use that in the novel to show one of the characters who the reader has felt sorry for right until the end of the novel. It's twisted where you find out actually he's not someone you should feel sorry for. He's a really kind of evil person, and also show the anti-hero had a glimmer of kindness in him, where he kind of helped someone out of that really dark, horrible situation. So I think there's ways that you could use it in the writing as well. But again, there's some personal things can be quite difficult to write about, I think. But sometimes they're the most therapeutic things to write about if you can write about it.
Yeah. And I'm like Sarah. I just want to reflect. It's a pretty shitty world out there, you know, and I kind of want to reflect that as much as I can, really. And it's the kind of anger at the way the world is going that drives a lot of my stories, I think.
Same.
You know, I can set the world to right in my book if I can't set it to right in the real world, you know.
Yeah.
I think anger's a great creative lubricant, isn't it? It's, you know, I think I tend to start off all my books with something I'm just so pissed off about, and then it kind of develops into a story. And I do draw on my own stuff and use it in the book. You know, the Good Samaritans. It was about an insomniac, and I am the massive insomniac, and his relationship was very dysfunctional and breaking down, and mine was at that time as well. But I have used it. I have used writing to kind of write my way out of stuff as well. You know, the whole kind of suicide cult thing. I was very. I have a friend who struggles mentally, and I hadn't properly listened to what it was like for him, I don't think, and so I kind of really researched it, and I wrote that book in a way to try and understand him a bit more. Yeah, you can use it both ways, you know.
Yeah, I think you mine your own life for little things, and then sometimes almost by stealth find yourself working through things from your life in the book that you never maybe intended to, particularly things that are happening at the time when you're writing. I've done that several times. I was finishing a book at the same time that my mother passed away, and looking back at it, the drafts I was writing then, this book hasn't been published yet, you know, there's stuff in there. There was a sort of mother-daughter relationship, but I found it working into that quite a lot when I've read it back. So I think you can almost unconsciously work out your own problems or issues in the work, without necessarily intending to.
So if we move on to sort of like the publishing industry in general, cozy crime has had a bit of a resurgence. Do we think that dark, gritty crime will have a similar resurgence? And why do we think cozy crime is so popular in the UK at the minute and not so much in like America and France and other European countries?
We've also got a big history of it here. I mean, you've got the sort of holy trinity of Christie, Sayers, Allingham, you know, and you could be easily forgiven for believing that before about 1960 there was nothing else in British crime writing other than these classical mysteries. I don't know whether the current resurgence is necessarily a love of that, or whether it's based around a series of brand name authors who've adopted that form. Like, I mean, Richard Osman would have sold a lot of copies of anything he'd written, I think. That's obviously what he likes writing. And, you know, we've had several other, you know, people who had a name attached to them before they started writing come into the industry and write in a similar vein. So maybe that's just something that's happened all at the same time. I don't know. I mean, obviously there have been other people that have been successful as well. So who knows? But I mean, I think these things are successful in America, just maybe not relatively quite as big as they are here because these writers are English. I mean, crime publishing in general is still pretty parochial. You know, big English crime writers don't necessarily do that well in America. Certainly don't sell to the same level they do here, no matter how big they are here. So, you know, and vice versa, Americans here. The weird thing is the French, I mean, there's often no way of explaining them, but French publishing, they publish a lot of American, sometimes even British writers who do far better in France than they do in their home country, which is bewildering to me. but French publishing conglomeration hasn't taken it over as much as it has here, I don't think. But you've still got a lot of big French publishers that are French owned, that are still owned by the families of the people who founded them. And that doesn't exist here at all anymore. Like in the 70s, all of our privately owned or family owned publishers started getting taken over by bigger and bigger companies that became, international conglomerates. So now there are, other than the likes of Faber, which is kind of unique in the British publishing scene at the moment, all of the imprints are owned eventually by somebody else, a company so vast that they're not run in the same way they used to be. They're not run with the same sort of personal touch necessarily. And that's not necessarily it. Editors don't make conscious choices relating to that, but the system that exists now, like if an editor from a Big Five imprint, they have to go to an acquisitions table to justify a book they're buying. No acquisitions table necessarily is going to say you can't publish that. What they're going to do is pull the purse strings, which might make it unworkable. They're going to say, yeah, you can buy that, but you can only pay them $4,000. That's not going to pay a gas bill. And so you get this, like I alluded to earlier, this blob in the middle of publishing, because editors have to go into a meeting not only with profit and loss projections, but with comp titles. That's the thing that's ruined everything. So every meeting starts with, this book is like some other shit that's been successful. And that starts going full circle, where you have to start looking for books that are like other books, because they're the ones you're going to get past marketing in a meeting. So that leaves the stuff that editors are personally attached to on the fringes. And in America, because the publishing industry is that much bigger, the circumference of it is that much bigger, the fringe is bigger. So there's more space, I think, for what we would consider to be indie material to be aired out in bigger publishers over there, simply because there's 5-6 times the amount of people buying books. So you're always going to be able to have support fringe voices in a different way. And the French just read more and better than us. So
they're just better. Is it just that the French are better? They make better films. We have
a problem.
Yeah. I think it's got to be a cultural thing. I think obviously we got onto this cozy thing. Everyone was feeling crap in lockdown and everything, and they wanted to feel good. And I think maybe there's a Britishness to kind of escaping that in our head, whereas maybe like the French want to deal with it head on and they want to talk about it. So I don't know. I don't know if it's
the French history. I mean, you think Simenon, Frederick Dard, the history of their crime writing aren't middle-class pastoral mysteries like ours are. I mean, the other thing here, though, if you think about the history of noir, like the darker side of writing, and even looking at the American stuff, Jim Thompson, whatever. By the time we got to the 1980s, Jim Thompson was unknown in America. He was out of print, out of fashion. He was basically an obscure figure. And Barry Gifford started Black Lizard, a reprint house, essentially. And for peanuts, he started buying up, the rights to the likes of Thompson or Charles Williams or David Goodis, because all of these guys were out of print. Nobody was paying any attention to them. So for relatively little advance money, he managed to bring all these guys back in. And it kind of started a conversation in publishing and among writing, I guess, there as to what noir was. Because like when James M. Cain wrote, nobody used the word noir. The word didn't exist. The French kind of coined it during the war, but it didn't really get any currency in American cinema, which is where it was used first until the 60s, when they started making their own revisionist thrillers. So then they started looking back more at what are we revising? We're revising the classic film noir, but nobody in Hollywood ever said, I'm going to make a film noir. They just didn't use the term. It would have been a crime melodrama or a crime thriller. Noir was only used retrospectively. And equally in literature, it wasn't really used until the advent of Black Lizard. Nobody ever described crime novels as noir really until the 80s, until within all of our lifetimes. And we've never had in England, I don't think, in Britain, that kind of retrospective search for the progenitors of darker British crime fiction. So we just think of, Christie and Allingham and that kind of thing. But if you go back to the writers that grew up in the Depression or witnessed the rise of fascism in Europe, there are a lot of guys and women that have noirish characteristics to their writing that you wouldn't necessarily call crime writers. Even Christopher Isherwood, John Summerfield, James Curtis, people like this, Gerald Kirsch. So there is a deep history of darker fiction here. I just don't think there's been any sort of joined up thinking, either culturally or commercially, that sort of puts it together into a theme in the same way that's been done in France and America. Or I could be talking bollocks, but yeah.
Wow, I think I got it.
I don't think you are, Dom. I think you, hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, it's fascinating. I could listen to you all day.
I'm not sure whether that explains why cozy is more popular here than anywhere else.
No, I
mean, from being a Scouser and not always seeing ourselves as part of England, sometimes we see ourselves as the, Republic of Liverpool. I feel culturally different to your sort of middle class English person, and I think we, I can't imagine cozy doing that well up here because it wouldn't relate to how we feel about life and the things we see. I mean, I don't think Christie was all that cozy, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of darkness in her, but it was just how she could express it at the time. So, sort of being slightly not English, but growing up in an Irish household, I'd say, English people can be very genteel. They can probably maybe want a bit more subtlety. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That would be my explanation. I think so. I think there's this massive nostalgic thing about chunks of England, if you like. They hark back to the English Bobby on his bike riding around solving crime. And they like to read gentler stuff, because it reminds them of the world that they imagine was existing 40 years ago or whatever, which probably wasn't.
It didn't actually exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you could team up with any dark writer,
I think that pervades all aspects of life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No, you're right. I was going to say, if you could team up with any dark writer, living or dead, who would you want to write a novel with, and what would you do?
Can I start on this? I've got a massive girl crush on Fiona Cummings. I'm just like, I love her shiny hair. I love the way she talks. I love the fact she was a journalist and she used to interview all sorts of stars like George Clooney and Michael Jackson. And she's one of the very few people who I would, people talk about an auto by author now. I didn't even know what that was last week. But any book she brings out, I would read. She's very, very dark, but beautifully lyrical at the same time. Like Steve, but just not as grim as you, Steve, love. Beautifully lyrical and looking at really dark things. And I'm just, madly in love with her. So I'd probably want to work with Fiona.
Nice.
She is much darker than you expect, I think, her books. I didn't expect them to be so dark.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Come on, Steve.
I think I've got to say
me.
Probably the obvious. Oh, of course, you, yeah. But I'm thinking more dead people.
Yeah.
I'd think I'd
What's
like
new,
to do
Steve?
with Jim Thompson, probably Jim Thompson. And then I'd love to do like a collaboration story. He does a chapter, I do a chapter, and then we both see where it goes. I'd like to do something like that. So kind of the obvious, I guess. I don't think it'd have to be someone as well that I could work with, I could gel with,
Ooh.
Charles Bukowski would be great, but I think I'd be, on the phone to him like, have you done the chapter yet? And he's not done it, and then it's going to cause trouble. So
10 pages a day. He did 10 pages a day. He was on it.
I'm going to nick Sean Cosby before anybody else grabs him.
Nice.
I have no idea what we might come up with between us, but it would be kind of interesting, I think. And also, he seems a very funny guy as well in real life, so that would work for me.
Nice.
I don't really care if somebody paid me enough money. I'd write with anyone.
Yes.
How much money?
I've done co-writing and ghostwriting before, and there's nobody.
Give us a number. I'm interested. Give us a number.
Yeah.
You can get paid.
Get my wallet out.
Co-writing works in funny ways if you do it. Like the James Patterson type model.
Oh yeah.
You can make 6 figures out of doing one of them because they put you on the contract, so you get residuals. There are other people that it would be done as a buyout, and you probably get about $50 for doing one. That's a few months' work. It's good money. They pay on time. You get to pretend to be somebody else for a bit. This work I found quite good fun. But
I'm not paying you 50. I have to come lower.
I get you a pint. I don't know. That's about... I don't think I'd want to write with anyone else. I feel like it's a solo endeavor. Like if I was doing a screenplay or something like that, I think I could collaborate. But I almost wrote the original Beresford. I almost wrote it with Sarah Pimbra. I messaged her and said, "Oh, I've got this idea. We could write together," because we both kind of do that crime plus weird thing. And she was, and we were up for it. And then she kind of exploded into and got really busy. And she's like, "I'm going to let you down." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I wrote it, and she's like, "Oh, damn, it was that book." Oh, yeah. But so yeah, I'd do something with her, especially now. But this is before. Yeah. I like being on my own. So many writers are like, "Oh, I'm on my own all the time, and it's really hard." It's the best bit.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I got when it came to editing my first book. Oh yeah, you did comedy, didn't you, Trev?
Eh?
You did comedy
with another guy, so it was a that was great. It was good to have somebody around, but I did enjoy suddenly doing it myself. Didn't have anybody going, "No, I don't like that bit." It's great.
Who did
not until you're done. Yeah.
Just your editor.
Yeah.
Who did you write comedy for, Trevor?
We just wrote independent comedy plays. Got them out ourselves. It worked really well for 10 years. Quite a lot of them are still playing somewhere. But they're literally the opposite of noir crime, I think.
Yeah, it's quite a jump.
Yeah, literally. I mean, honestly, our most successful is about 3 elderly cleaning ladies who start a telephone sex chat line. That's how opposite they are.
Yeah.
But it makes me quite a bit of money still, so
Dark and gritty game shows are quite popular on like Netflix and things like that. So if we had a game show now where you could win £1 million, there was 5 of you in it, and you had to nominate somebody to stay in a dark fictional place for one night, and if they survived, they'd go through to the next round. And you had to eliminate them through putting them in a dark place and seeing if they could survive in a fictional world. Obviously, very hypothetical game here. What dark place would you like to put Dominic into, or Sarah into, or Trevor into, or Steve into?
House of Commons, that's pretty bloody dark. House of Commons is pretty dark, isn't it? Where would you go?
They've got to survive the night. And if obviously they don't survive, then you could be one step closer to £1 million. So.
I'll say Hell House by Richard Mason. Has anyone read that? Hell House by Richard Mason. So it's basically a haunted house story, but it's really psychological. Richard Mason wrote lots of the Twilight Zone episodes. I'm a big Twilight Zone nerd, and it's just a really trippy story. It's a really trippy house. It's very similar to The Shining. I think it was written way before The Shining, but it's very similar, and there's lots of stuff about parapsychology, paranormal activity and whatnot. It's a good read. I recommend it. It's not really. It's a dark story, but it's more in the horror universe, I guess.
Nice.
That would be mine. Survive that.
I'd put Trevor into a sex chat room that was opened up by a bunch of cleaners, and let him stay the night there, listening to that. See how he got on.
I think I might manage that somehow.
Yeah.
I'll be going, I can make a sequel. I'll just listen to what that's I don't know. The only thing I can think of is have you seen Wreck, the movie Wreck, Spanish horror movie?
Oh yeah.
Hideous house full of creatures. I'd put who would I put there? I put Sarah there, I think.
I'd survive it. I'd put anybody. I'd put anyone in the classroom of teenagers for 24 hours because everyone slags teachers off so much, But you spend even 1 hour with 32 kids, then psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, intellectually, you have got to be strong to survive.
I agree.
You're
We've got
already
3 in
on
this
the
house, and that's more than enough. That's 3 too many.
Sarah, I was doing PGC training to be an English high school teacher, and I quit and moved to Asia. So that's how bad. That's how bad it was.
Maybe that's what I need to do. I need to move to Asia. I feel as though I've been in purgatory for the last 29 years. God knows what I did in my previous life, but I'm obviously suffering for it now.
You're doing a great job.
The thing with
great job, Sarah.
Horror, like horror locations or horror anything, horror confronts the real world with something horrific. But I've always found it more disturbing when the nature of the entire world that's been written about is weird. So like something like that David Lynch would do, for instance. Like I don't think he's horror because he doesn't confront a normal world with horrific stuff. He just puts you in an entire world that makes no sense to you, but is the only world you've got. So if you think of either the end of the second season of Twin Peaks, like the original ending with the mirror, or I actually think the ending of season 3 in many ways was even worse. Like a sort of existential dread of what happens at the end of it, where you're left moored in a world that looks like yours, but it isn't. I think would be worse than being sort of punished with weirdness or outlandish horror.
I agree that the end of season 3 was definitely worse than the end of season 1, but season 2, but for different reasons. Why did they do it? Why'd they do it? Why? Oh. Everything I write comes back to Twin Peaks. There's so many references in everything I write. I'm just like, God, I love it. Yeah, that was a good shout, Tom. That was a good one.
That was a good shout. I remember being particularly freaked out by Eraserhead when I was younger. That was horrific.
That thing that comes out the back of the dumpster thing in Mulholland Drive as well.
Yeah.
Just that one little moment. Oh, yeah.
There's a good story about Eraserhead and Hunter S. Thompson. He went to a hotel and it was the first time he'd seen cable television, him and his wife, and he turned the telly on and Eraserhead was on and he'd never seen it, didn't even know what it was. So he sits there and watches this film and he's like, this is fucking amazing. Cable television is the greatest invention in the history of human culture. And then obviously never saw anything remotely like it on cable television again. The greatest letdown in his sort of cultural identity in life. For a brief 90-minute period, he obviously thought cable was just like some channel into a different universe or something.
Oh, brilliant. So we're coming close to the hour mark. I don't know how long you guys want to go on for. I know Steve it's late into the early hours of the morning for him. So if you've got any more questions, Steve, obviously this is a crossover between the Writing Community Chat Show and Punk Noir, then feel free to ask away. And then we can start to wrap up.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm interested in everyone's origin story. How did you get interested? Well, I'm fascinated with, what makes someone write romance, what makes someone write crime, what makes someone write horror. And I think everyone's kind of got an origin story of why they chose the genre or why the genre chose them. And my origin story is it sounds like bullshit, but it really happened. When I was 12 years old, my best friend got a job working at a coffee shop, like a little greasy spoon. And he said to me, if you come down, I'll give you a free sandwich, a free bacon butty, and a coffee in the mornings on Saturdays. So I used to go down there, and it used to be next to a corner shop. And I'd get my dad the newspaper and go back home. And every time walking past, there's a big, down my street at that time, there was a big white house. It was a really big, beautiful house, but it was very close to the main path. and I didn't know who lived there, but they had a beautiful S-type Jaguar. It was like the red wine color, and I really loved it. But I never saw who it was that lived there. And then one Saturday I was going down, and there was a green S-type Jaguar parked there as well as I approached. And for the first time, I saw someone come out of that house, and it was two really big guys and a woman. And they walked past me, and the guys just ignored me. But the woman, she made eye contact with me, and she kind of made this kind of weird face, which I can still remember really clearly today. I can still remember exactly what she was wearing. Can remember, so precise. But as I got to the house, I heard someone moaning. Oh, and I looked. There was an old man on the front steps. The front door was open, and there was blood on the pavement. And I thought, oh, the old man's fallen over. So I said, are you all right? Are you all right? And he just kept on groaning and groaning. And so I ran across the road to my friend's sandwich shop, and I said, there's an old man at a house, and he's fallen over, and he's cut himself. So they went over there, and then they called the ambulance. And it turned out he'd been shot in the kneecaps. And he'd been, those people, I don't know who they were. Apparently they were selling drugs together, and he'd been stealing the drug money or something. But the police came to my house. They wanted to know exactly what I saw and stuff like that. But I was only 12, so I couldn't really remember much, that I could tell them. So, but yeah, they actually, they caught the people in the end. And then the guy moved away. I never saw. But that kind of, I'm really fascinated with this idea of something can be so normal, but so fucked up at the same time. Or I'm fascinated with how people can have a very normal looking life or a very normal situation, but it's also very dark. I'm really interested in the gray, which is what kind of pushes me to write, I think. This gray area that we all have. Like, I heard on the news about this guy whose dad died, and his dad was a World War II veteran, and they were clearing out the house, and in the garage they found 6 human heads, and they were souvenirs from the Pacific during the war. So this normal family guy had 6 human heads that he'd taken as souvenirs during the war and brought back to America. So I'm really fascinated with these people who are, I guess, who look normal. They seem normal, and then they're not.
Where were they? Were like on the mantelpiece or something?
No, they were in the garage in boxes.
All right. Well, like a normal person. That's where we normally keep our heads. Yeah.
Tucked away, of course.
Yeah.
On the mantelpiece. So I'm interested. That's my little origin story, or one of them. How about you guys? Do you have anything that kind of pushed you to start or leaned you towards the darker side of life?
No. I think I wanted to be a writer in general, just because I didn't fancy working for a living, and this seemed like a more.
But why are you not writing romance then? Why are you writing?
Well, rather than about romance, I mean, I initially started writing historical fiction. I guess more sort of general fiction, not really crime. I wrote a few novels that didn't really sell, and then I sort of backed into crime because I got stuck on a book, and I wanted to write something that I'd sort of forgotten how to finish a book. You know, when you kind of get stuck, like I knew how the book should finish, but I kept on rewriting the first 60,000 words of it, like fucking 6 or 7 times. So I had like 250,000 words, and it wasn't getting any further than that. And I was like, I've broken something in my head here. And I was just a fan of crime. I used to read a lot of crime fiction. So I thought, I had this idea, the character Boone that was in my first 2 novels. And I thought, I'll see if I can just write something that will flush the system out. So in many ways, Boone was some kind of mental enema just to get me going again. And that was the book that my agent managed to sell. So, and I think that's why when I first pitched Vine Street to my publisher, they said no, because they were worried about this sort of change in direction from contemporary thrillers to this sort of labyrinthine historical noir thing. But to me, it wasn't a change. It was a return to more like the novels that I wrote before Past Life. So it felt natural to me. So I guess I sort of ended up where I wanted to be anyway, maybe slightly more crime-ish than it was. But how I got there, it just appeared to be a bunch of mistakes and bad decisions as opposed to some kind of, intent.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm a bit like Dom. Mostly it was what I read before I started writing. I've often called Enid Blyton's the gateway drug to crime fiction for people of a certain age. It's like, and I think that's why I kind of write stories about ordinary people getting caught up and having to get involved in crimes, because, I read The Famous Five and Secret Seven. I thought, that's great. Ordinary people can sort this shit out. We don't need to rely on the police or whatever. I've just taken that a little bit further, I think. And also Hitchcock films as well. I think like North by Northwest, again, ordinary guy gets caught up in a crime and has to do something about it. Those are the stories that I really that got me interested in that world, I think. So nothing personal. I do remember I got slapped by a cop once when I was about 13. Went to a football match and we were coming out. They tried to send us with the away fans to the station, which was miles away from where we were going. And I was with my mate's dad who'd taken us, and we went to try and get through the line. And this cop just slapped me. I was about 13. He just full on slapped me in the face. And I think I've always had a thing about abuse of power since then. It's like, I didn't know you could do that. You can't just hit 13-year-old kids, surely.
Clip around the ear, Trev. Clip around the ear.
Yeah, but it was a bit more than that, Tom. It was like a full-on slap. I think I just kind of stood there and stared at him and thought, I can't believe that just happened. So, I have a lot of dodgy cops in my books, and that's a throwback to that, I think.
For me, it's...
Yeah, go on, sir.
Sorry, for me, it's a lot more. It's more cultural. So we grew up in an Irish Catholic household. My dad's a medic. They're both. My parents are religious. We always went to church. So I kind of grew up. My mum's very Irish. She's got a very Irish attitude to death, which is, we talk about it. There's no hiding from it, So we and my dad always talked about sort of when he was at university and dissecting bodies. So we grew up with the ideas of death and sin and salvation and evil and goodness, and all the really, really rich cultural background. And my elder brother was very interested he became a pathologist assistant, I suppose, in the end of the day, forensic scientist. But when we were kids, we used to read the Marshall Cavendish murder case files once a week. We used to pore through these murders and think about that. And I was obsessed with the Osborne Book of Ghosts and Haunted Houses. So it was always about like the afterlife and what happens if you die and what does it mean to have a physical body. Just all those things kind of, gave me a real interest in humans. I mean, you can slag religion off and you can, say what you want, but it gives you a real playground in your imagination for humans and what they do and how far they go and good versus evil. And so I really kind of was quite interested in the darkness in human beings and what made one person so good and try so hard and want to do the good things, and what made another person want to do bad things and want to be really bad. And eventually I became quite obsessed with psychopathy, and a lot of the treatment is about, can we cure psychopathy? Is it an illness? Is it just the way your brain works? Is it evil? What's the difference between evil and psychopathy, or evil and mental illness in crime? All those things really fascinate me.
Have you read the Doug Johnston books, Sarah? The Skelf series?
No, I think he's with Canelo as well, isn't he? With
really
My Gang,
no,
he's
with Aranda.
Oh, okay.
But they're set in a funeral parlor. They're all about death. He was a writer in residence at a funeral parlor. They're great about
really
death. You really enjoy them.
Really,
they're quite dark as well. They're kind of surprisingly dark, I think.
Yeah.
I'll send you my book as well, Sarah. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Sean Cosby's wife owns and runs a funeral parlour.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
He worked there. That's how he wrote his first.
yeah, I remember him talking about that.
Who's that?
When we're paired up, Don, I'll
Cosby.
probably go and visit the funeral parlour and see what it's like. When Sean and I are producing our masterpiece.
Oh yeah, that you're collaborating on. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Oh God, Origin. I don't know. I think I was kind of molded in this cesspit that was like Hemingway's war and Bukowski's sex drive and Polanik's cynicism. That's what I think. And then I was born out of that. I never meant to write crime fiction. I was kind of interested in, I don't know, fucking truth and love, and I was just a bit wanky about writing, I think. And I was kind of thrust into it because I thought I would be like the next Polanik, right? I could write anything I wanted, and as long as it was about the human condition and fighting the man or whatever. And I was told that my style would suit crime fiction, so I wrote something that had crime in it, and I think for the last 13 years I've been trying to write my way out of it. So every book gets further and further away. I haven't had a detective for 4 or 5 books now. I'm just kind of slightly pushing away. My next book is just like there's nothing in it that's crime. I look forward to seeing how my publisher spins it. But yeah, so that's my origin. I got thrust into it without really wanting to be there. And I people talk about all these crime authors from the past. I'm like, God, I haven't read those because I'm too busy reading other stuff. I tend to read the kind of fringe stuff. I haven't read one Agatha Christie book. I haven't read one because I'd rather read the stuff on the edges, which is probably why I write kind of on the edge as well. Yes, that's my origin. A cesspit.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I think we've got some really good tips, and definitely, if you go back and look at the show, there's so many recommendations. The dark, gritty crime novels, which I'm sure a lot of viewers are going to enjoy. But before we go, can we just know a little bit more about yourselves in terms of where you can find your books? Maybe if you want to direct somebody towards a novel that you've not mentioned that you really think people should read, or a writer that's currently writing that you think deserves a bit more promotion, maybe mention them as well before we wrap up. Unless you've got any more questions, Steve, that you'd like to ask.
No, I think I'm completely satisfied. That was awesome.
God, imagine being completely satisfied. I don't think that's ever happened.
I should imagine, though, at nearly 2 a.m., if you've got a bed behind you, the idea of being completely satisfied is probably quite close. But yeah, before we go, a bit about yourselves again, your latest book or things that we're looking forward to in the future, and then maybe raise another writer up that you think deserves a little bit more of a spotlight in the.
Well, I've already mentioned Fiona Cummings, and I really think she's worth a look. Into the Dark and All of Us Are Broken, along with her earlier books, When I Was 10 and The Neighbour. I think she's fantastic, and I think she well deserves to be up there with the best of them. You can find information about me on sarahmoorhead.com, which is my website, where you can see my my makeup for writers video, which is very embarrassing, and the kids in school have seen it and they love it, or all sorts of what I've been up to and what I'm doing. And my book is The Treatment, that was out in August, which is about can we cure psychopathy. I've designed my own criminal punishment system because at the end of the day I'd probably like to be in charge of the world and do that.
You could do a better job than the people we've got at the moment, Sarah, I think.
I'll say.
Shall I go next? I told you about my books earlier. I'm working on a new book called The Silent Killer, which is about a senior cop who's in the first stages of early onset dementia, which is due out next year, provided my editor waves it through at our next meeting. It may be a bit longer than that. As for other writers, I always like to shout out newish writers really. Natalie Marlowe, I think Needless Alley is a great dark debut novel. I think Dom's just got a new one as well. Yeah, I got it today in the post as well. So I've just got the sequel, which is out next year. But that's a terrifically dark, slightly historical noir, which I'd recommend. And Rose Wilding, Speak of the Devil, set in Newcastle, starts with 7 women sitting around a severed man's head in an upstairs room of a Newcastle pub, which is as good a start as you're going to get, really. And it's a terrific book. So those two, I think.
Okay, well, you heard about my books earlier too. I think one of my favourite reads in the last couple of years, actually somebody I think Trev knows, is Tom Ben.
Oh yeah, I do.
Who teaches at UEA.
Yeah, he was one of my tutors.
Yeah, he works on the crime fiction masters there, doesn't he? But he published a novel called Oxblood, and he'd written 3.
Do the same as you now, Dom. I can go.
Yeah, there you go. I think he published 3 crime novels when he was disgustingly young a while ago.
Very young, yeah.
That were more sort of traditionally crime, and now he's written this novel, which is it's sort of about the characters you don't see in crime novels. It's about the women that get left at home when the men either kill each other or go to prison. And it's about three generations of one family, grandmother, mother, daughter, who've been living alone in a house and doing okay. And then one of the men of the family is coming out of prison, and it kind of disrupts this existence. And it's marvelously fucking weird for a novel. Like, I mean, it is crime fiction and it isn't crime fiction. There's a randy ghost in it. The language is sublime. I mean, he's a dancer, if you know what I mean. There's a joy to reading him on a sentence level. And I just think over the last couple of years, it's been, I think, the standout British crime novel for me. Absolutely loved it. So more Tom Ben, that's what I say.
Have you read his earlier stuff as well, Tom?
No, I haven't.
Oh, they're really, I mean, they're very Mancunian. Like really, the dialect is quite difficult to work your way through. The Doll Princess I read, certainly. That was the first one, I think.
Yeah.
Really good dark crime books.
Yeah,
I think Oxblood is very different, certainly.
Yeah. Well, there's been quite a big gap, isn't there? I think between him writing and when it.
He was my tutor in 2015 to 2017 or whatever, and then last year he won the Sunday Times Best Young Novelist. Yeah. And I was like, "Young novelist? He was my bloody tutor like 6-7 years ago. What the hell?"
Yeah, it's sick, isn't it?
Yeah, insane. Yeah, he's ridiculously talented, I think.
I hate people like that. Yeah.
Especially when they're teaching you. Well, it's like, what?
My last. So yes, obviously I've just had a book out. I said earlier you can get it. I've just found Substack. I think it's the coolest thing ever. I'm on there. I'm sharing short stories, and I don't think anyone can give you real tips on writing, but I'm telling you how I do it, and it might work, it might not. So I don't know, go on Substack and look me up and you'll find me probably. Authors that I love, I think Simona Buchholz, she is German. She writes for Render. The Chastity Riley series is just, I mean, such a, she probably hate me saying strong female protagonist, whatever, but she's such a great character. But I don't care about the plot. I don't care about all of that. The writing of that is just gorgeous. And I don't want to sound like a suck up, but Steve, I think if you're not reading Steve, you're an idiot, because you can see he's like, oh, I love Bukowski. And when I first read Bukowski, I fell in love with him. And when I first read Steve, I was like, well, I can see that he loved him too. And I think he cares so much about the words that he's just fucking brilliant, and he should have more fucking readers. And so that's my recommendation, without sounding like a dick.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah,
I'm going Will to second that. I am teaching the Faber course up here in Newcastle, and I wanted to give them something that used setting brilliantly, and I gave them a few pages from I'm going to get your title wrong now. Shadows dancing in. Continue.
Shadows slow dancing in derelict rooms.
Yes, thank you. I gave them a couple of pages from that, and they just blew them away. Frankly, they were like, yeah, but can you give us somebody that we can actually try and get even close to with their writing? It's astonishing.
No, thank you.
So read that as well, people. I should have mentioned that as well. That's amazing.
Yeah, I should have given a book title. What's the one with the shootout in the restaurant at the beginning?
Say goodbye when I'm gone.
Oh yeah, love that. That whole kind of all the language in that it's so good. It's so that opening chapter is a beast. Yeah.
No, well, thank you everyone for you've all been so supportive, since I first started writing, and I really appreciate it. And without you guys, I don't even know whether I would, be continuing to write, to tell the truth, because it's been a bit of a battle, but you've always been there, cheering me on. So it always gives me, enthusiasm to continue when I'm feeling a bit depressed with it all, or it's not going very well. So that's the thing I appreciate you all for the most. So thank you.
As long as you pay us back when you're a star, Steve, that's the
definitely. But as well, before we do go, I just want to say I want to give a shout out to all of the writers that have been published at Punk Noir magazine. So Punk Noir magazine, it publishes music, arts, literature, it's interviews, it's short stories, it's reviews. So if you're interested in music, arts, or literature, if you're interested in new indie poets or new indie writers, especially crime, please check out Punk Noir magazine and Punk Noir Press.
Brilliant. And again, Steve, just before we go, how can they do that with Punk Noir magazine? What's the best sort of platforms to find them on and things like that?
Yeah, so we're in Twitter. We're on Twitter, obviously, but you can just Punk Noir magazine. I think it's punknoirmagazine.com now. Yeah, so we're actually redoing the website at the moment. It's all being rebranded, and I'm computer literate, but I'm lucky to have a fantastic supportive team behind me who are helping me out a huge amount. So I've been very blessed, very lucky.
And are you going to be open for like submissions and things like that in the future, or are you going to hold like cycles where people can submit and things, or?
Yeah. So we're hoping to open it up towards the end of 2024 once we've really got a momentum and we've built things up, because this is new for me and my partners that are working with it now. So we want to make sure that we're ready to go, and then we're going to take a chance on other people's work at that point. So we're actually also, I'm looking to do submissions and then hopefully to put together a little dream team of authors,
Right here, the dream team.
There you go. So if you guys have anything completely messed up that a mainstream publisher won't publish, send it here.
Brilliant. Yeah, so on that note, I think we'll end the show. But thank you very much for coming on. Thank you, Steve, obviously, for giving the Writing Community Chat Show the honour of chatting to you and hosting this event with you.
No, thank
obviously,
you.
We're huge fans of everyone that is here. And yeah, we just hope, obviously, that you continue to grow. Like Carver said before, more people need to read your work. And we hope you continue on that trajectory. We normally have a habit on the Writing Community Chat Show of having people on that then go off onto the BBC and all that type of stuff and win things later down the line. So long may that continue. And hopefully the BBC will be in touch with you soon. We'll see your face on the real telly. Although you can watch
Crime Watch.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. This will go out 8 a.m. UK time. But I'm sure because there's not been any interaction with the audience tonight, which we normally do, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please just send them in or drop them in the bottom of this YouTube video, and we'll endeavor to get back to you. because everyone's really welcoming, really warm. I'm sure they will respond if you've got any burning questions about darkness or gritty literature. But yeah, so I'm going to do that thing where I wave, and then I'm going to try and end the show at the same time. So yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.